Welcome to Chapter 1 of the Bronze Kings, Book 2 of the First Awakening series. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new to this series, welcome. You're joining us at a crucial moment, 450 years after the revelation. The immortals have confessed their deception. Partnership governance has been established. Enhanced humans and baseline humans are trying to share power despite biology making equality nearly impossible. If you've been with us since Book 1, welcome back. You witnessed the revelation in 2850 BCE when 150,000 humans voted to form partnership despite knowing immortals had controlled them for 50,000 years. You saw Gilgamesh choose justice over efficiency, Kronos design institutional protections, and Nyx calculate that partnership had a 77% survival probability. Now, we test whether those institutions survive when founders die. This is Chapter 1, The King's Decline. Gilgamesh is dying. His grandson Enkidu doesn't understand why partnership matters. And in Thalia's clinic, a baseline mother named Nammu holds the cloth that belonged to her dead daughter while enhanced children celebrate their recovery from the same fever. Biology doesn't negotiate with ethics. But partnership requires we try anyway. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The King's Decline. Uruk, Mesopotamia, 2850 BCE early morning, third day of the harvest moon. The tremor started in Gilgamesh's left hand. Not pain, he'd transcended simple pain decades ago, his enhanced nervous system routing damaged signals through pathways that transformed agony into mere information. But this was different. This was a failure. The kind of cellular breakdown that whispered of approaching mortality in a voice even his modified biology couldn't silence. He held his hand before his face in the pre-dawn darkness of his private chamber, watching fingers that had once bent bronze bare refuse to close completely around the stylus he'd been holding. The clay tablet lay on the floor where it had fallen, wet, cuneiform, half-formed, documenting memories he wouldn't live long enough to finish recording. The stylus rolled when it hit the floor, its copper tip leaving a smear across the fallen tablet before settling against the chamber's eastern wall. Gilgamesh watched it come to rest, his enhanced vision tracking the trajectory even in near darkness, calculating velocity and impact angle with processing speed that remained perfect even as the body housing that processing failed. 56 years ago, that same hand had positioned the foundation stone for the Aina Temple's eastern corner. 3 tons of limestone, shaped to specifications encoded in religious rituals, made mathematical precision seem like divine instruction. Gilgamesh had lifted it alone, his enhanced musculature and skeletal reinforcement turning what should have been impossible into merely difficult. 10,000 baseline workers had watched, their faces showing the mixture of awe and fear that enhanced humans learned to recognize as the moment humans forgot they were watching refugees and started believing they were witnessing gods. That was the moment Sharur's father, what was his name? Akka. Chief engineer. Baseline human who'd spent 40 years mastering architecture through observation and experimentation rather than cognitive processing speed, had approached afterward and had waited until the crowds dispersed, until religious ceremony gave way to practical planning, until Gilgamesh was alone among the foundation stones. "You're not divine," Akka had said quietly. Not an accusation. Statement. Observation delivered with the calm certainty of someone who'd spent decades noticing details others missed. Divine beings don't need water. Don't eat. Don't sweat when they lift stones, even if they lift them easily. You're something else. Something powerful, but not gods. Gilgamesh had frozen, his enhanced reflexes screaming responses his conscious mind rejected, silence him. Threaten him. Ensure secrecy through fear. 50,000 years of accumulated immortal wisdom suggesting that discovery required containment, that observation required suppression, that knowledge required control. Instead, he'd met Akka's eyes and told the truth. No. We're not divine. We're refugees from a world that destroyed itself. We came here, found you, and decided to help rather than watch you repeat our mistakes. The modifications we gave some humans, the enhancements that make them stronger, faster, those were meant to create partnerships. Equal governance despite unequal capabilities. Akka had absorbed this information with careful consideration, processing the implications rather than reacting emotionally. And you didn't tell anyone this because? Because humans worshipped us when they thought we were gods. We feared they'd resent us if they knew we were just refugees who'd lied about our origins. Feared they'd rebel if they understood enhancement created inequality. We tried to hide behind institutional equality. You were right to fear that, Akka had said. Then added, after long silence, but you were wrong to lie about it. 6 months later, the revelation had happened. Gilgamesh and Kronos kneeling before assembled humanity, confessing deception, explaining their refugee status, revealing that 50,000 years of intervention had been driven by a trauma response rather than a divine mandate. Akka had collapsed during that revelation. Not from shock. From grief. Understanding that every human achievement his ancestors had accomplished had been guided, manipulated, and shaped by intervention disguised as inspiration. He'd never quite forgiven them. Had served on councils, had participated in partnership governance, had built the institutional frameworks that protected baseline humans from enhanced consolidation. But he'd never quite forgiven the lies. Had died 10 years later, still carrying that particular grief that came from discovering your species' history wasn't quite what you believed. And now Akka's son, Sheror, carried the same complicated relationship with partnership. Participating because alternatives were worse. Supporting because rejection meant surrender to enhanced domination. But never quite believing that refugees who'd lied for 48,000 years could be trusted to maintain equality when maintaining inequality would be easier. Gilgamesh couldn't blame him. Couldn't blame any baseline human for maintaining skepticism about a partnership built on the foundations of deception, however well-intentioned that deception had been. The stylus lay against the wall, copper tip gleaming in pre-dawn light. Once, Gilgamesh's hands had been steady enough to write with precision that matched Kronos' architectural calculations. Now they shook so severely that the cuneiform marks became illegible scratches. He'd been documenting Akka's observation. Divine beings don't sweat when they lift stones. The kind of detail that revealed enhanced humans was biological rather than supernatural. The kind of observation that baseline experience caught but enhanced processing might be dismissed as irrelevant. The kind of wisdom that came from 50 years of paying attention rather than processing information quickly. That documentation lay on the floor now, half-formed, incomplete like the partnership itself. Like every institution they built. I hope that a conscious choice could overcome biological determinism. Gilgamesh left the stylus where it had fallen. Enkidu would find it later, see the tremor evidence, and, without being told, understand that his grandfather's time was ending. Whether Enkidu would understand why that mattered remained uncertain. 172 years. That's what Thalia's examination had confirmed last month. 172 years of enhanced existence, and his body, designed to endure 2 centuries, was beginning its inevitable surrender to entropy. The tremor wasn't a symptom. It was a message. You are temporary. Everything you built is fragile. Time moves forward whether you're ready or not. Through the narrow window slit, Uruk sprawled in the copper light of sunrise. Mud brick buildings climbed toward the heavens in ordered blocks, their geometric precision still visible even from this height. Streets ran north-south and east-west with astronomical accuracy, dividing the city into quarters that could be administered independently yet functioned as a unified whole. Kronos' obsessive organizational gift to human civilization, rendered permanent in fired clay and packed earth. The Aina temple complex dominated the southern quarter, its 7-level ziggurat visible for kilometers across the Mesopotamian plain. 80 meters at its base, 20 meters tall, every measurement calculated to serve both practical function and astronomical observation. Gilgamesh had supervised its construction himself 50 years ago, working from specifications Kronos provided, encoded in religious rituals that prescribed exact measurements humans believed came from divine revelation. He had built those walls. Not metaphorically, his enhanced strength had literally helped position the foundation stones, his cognitive speed allowing him to coordinate 10,000 workers with an efficiency no baseline human administrator could match. The walls that would make him a legend, that scribes in the 3rd dynasty of Ur would credit to him 2,000 years hence, that archaeologists in a distant future would study as evidence of impossible ancient sophistication. All temporary. All ash, given enough time. The door to his chamber opened without sound. Enkidu had always crept despite his size. His grandson stood in the doorway, backlit by torchlight from the corridor, and even without turning, Gilgamesh knew what expression he'd be wearing. That mixture of impatience and concern that enhanced humans in their prime developed as they watched their elders fail. The look that said, I'm trying to care, but mostly I'm frustrated by your weakness. You're awake early, grandfather. Enkidu's voice carried the measured control of someone who'd mastered diplomatic speech but hadn't yet learned when to abandon it. 45 years old, less than a quarter through his expected lifespan, every cell in his body humming with the vitality Gilgamesh could remember feeling a century ago. The council session begins in 2 hours. Thalia insisted I ensure you were prepared. Prepared. Such a careful word. Not capable or ready. Prepared, which acknowledged diminishing capacity while maintaining the fiction of dignified decline. I dropped the stylus. Gilgamesh didn't turn from the window, watching dawn paint the city in shades of golden ochre. My hands shake now. Thalia says it's progressive peripheral neuropathy. The enhanced nervous system is degrading faster than baseline human healing can compensate. I have perhaps 30 years remaining. 30 years is nothing. Gilgamesh cut him off. I'm 172 years old. I've ruled this city for 146 years. Do you know what that means, Enkidu? I've watched 6 generations of baseline humans be born, grow, age, and die, 6 complete cycles of human life, all contained within my single existence. And in 30 years, I'll join them, and you'll still be young. You'll watch 3 more generations live and die before you even begin to fail. He finally turned to face his grandson. Enkidu stood precisely in the doorway, never fully entering without invitation, never retreating without dismissal, constantly measuring distance and approach with the spatial awareness enhanced cognition provided. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face carrying the mixture of features that marked enhanced bloodlines, sharper angles from accelerated bone development, eyes slightly larger from optical enhancement, skin that healed scars too quickly to accumulate the damage baseline humans wore as life's record. Perfect. Capable. And utterly unaware of why any of it mattered. I need you to understand something before I die, Gilgamesh said, moving away from the window. His legs obeyed but slowly, muscle fibers that had once lifted stone blocks now struggling with his own weight. The partnership we built, the councils, the representation, the institutional protections for baseline humans, none of it is natural. None of it flows from biology or obvious efficiency. It exists because we chose it, knowing it would be more complicated than the alternative. Enkidu's expression remained neutral, but Gilgamesh had spent enough decades reading enhanced micro-expressions to recognize confusion mixed with polite patience. The look that preceded disagreement was delivered diplomatically. Grandfather, I understand the history. The revelation, the decision to establish joint governance, the framework you and Kronos designed. You know the facts. Gilgamesh picked up the fallen stylus, his hand shaking badly enough that the tool rattled against his palm. But you don't feel why they matter. You weren't there when we made humans kneel before revealing ourselves as refugees, not gods. You didn't see Sharer's father collapse when he understood that everything his ancestors accomplished, every innovation, every advancement, came through intervention we'd hidden. You didn't feel the weight of that betrayal. He moved to his writing desk, where tablets stacked 3 deep documented memories he was racing against cellular failure to preserve. Names of baseline leaders who'd been allies. Decisions that had seemed wise at the time but created consequences decades later. The precise mathematical calculations Nix had provided showed that the partnership had a 77% survival probability, not certainty, just better odds than the alternatives. Among the tablets he'd written, one sat he hadn't. Different encoding. Quantum-stabilized marks that enhanced perception could barely be discerned. Methuselah's work. Order documentation that paralleled Gilgamesh's own record-keeping but served different purposes. Gilgamesh preserved memories for his successors. The order preserved truth for revelation. He'd known about the order since its founding. Enoch had asked for permission before establishing the organization and had explained that preparing humanity for eventual disclosure required infrastructure that operated independently of partnership governance. Gilgamesh had agreed. Some truths required preservation outside official channels. Some preparation required secrecy even from those committed to eventual transparency. The order documented everything he couldn't. The failures he didn't want to acknowledge. The compromises that seemed necessary at the time, but created consequences he regretted. The complete unvarnished truth about partnership's difficulties, preserved for judgment that wouldn't come until his great-great-great-grandchildren faced the revelation he'd promised but wouldn't live to witness. Methuselah visited sometimes. Encoded observations. Left tablets that said we're preserving this. We'll ensure revelation has complete context. We'll make sure future generations understand why you chose as you did, even when those choices proved inadequate. Gilgamesh had never felt more grateful for anything than for the Order's existence. Someone would remember. Someone would preserve. Someone would ensure that the partnership struggle wasn't forgotten, whether the partnership succeeded or failed. I'm documenting this because institutional memory isn't enough. Councils and constitutional frameworks matter, but they're hollow without understanding why they exist. Partnership isn't a solution, Enkidu. It's a choice we make every day, choosing justice over efficiency, choosing equality over optimization, choosing the more challenging path because the more straightforward path leads to tyranny. Enkidu stepped fully into the room now, his movements carrying the unconscious grace that enhanced the kinesthetic feedback. The council session today, the baseline representatives are proposing new agricultural distribution protocols. Their calculation methods are slower than ours. We could optimize the allocation in 1/10 the time. And they're insisting on equal processing time. Issa demands we wait for his delegation to complete their analysis before voting, even though we already know the superior solution. There it was. The crack in the foundation is visible only to someone watching for it. Gilgamesh set down the stylus carefully, using both hands to control the tremor. Issa is 73 years old. In baseline terms, that makes him ancient. He's outlived most of his generation by 2 decades. He's been on the Agricultural Council since before you were born, and he's forgotten more about Mesopotamian hydrology than you've ever learned. When he insists on processing time, he's not being slow. He's being thorough. But we're faster. We're different. Gilgamesh's voice carried an edge of frustration he rarely directed at Enkidu. Yes, enhanced cognition means you can run calculations quickly. But Issa understands context you'll miss because you haven't spent 50 years watching seasonal flooding patterns, haven't felt the soil between your fingers every planting season, haven't developed the intuition that comes from lived experience rather than processing speed. He paused, watching his grandson's face for comprehension that wasn't quite arriving. Partnership means accepting that sometimes the slower path produces better outcomes. Sometimes the optimal solution, mathematically, is the worst in practice. Sometimes often capability doesn't equal wisdom. Enkidu's expression remained carefully neutral, but Gilgamesh recognized the set of his jaw. Disagreement, he was disciplined enough not to voice, but not yet wise enough to question genuinely. The polite patience of someone humoring an elder's philosophy while privately believing time would prove him wrong. I'll ensure Issa's delegation has adequate time to present their analysis, Enkidu said, which was a surrender without a concession agreement to the form of partnership while maintaining certainty about its foolishness. Gilgamesh felt a familiar despair settle in his chest. Not the sharp pain of acute loss but the dull ache of watching someone you love walk toward a cliff while insisting the view is beautiful. He'd felt this before, watching his children make mistakes she couldn't prevent, watching Uruk's growth create problems he hadn't anticipated, watching 50,000 years of accumulated immortal wisdom create new catastrophes because knowledge doesn't equal wisdom. Before the council session, I want you to meet with Thalia. She's conducting medical examinations in the western quarter this morning. Specifically, she's treating 3 baseline families who lost children to fever last month. Enkidu's confusion was visible now. Why would I? Because you need to see what our advantages look like from the other side. You've never been seriously ill. Your enhanced immune system fights off infections that would kill baseline humans. You've never watched a child die because their body couldn't fight a disease that your body would eliminate without noticeable symptoms. You've never felt that particular helplessness. I'm aware that baseline humans have shorter lifespans. You know it. You don't feel it. There's a difference. Gilgamesh moved toward the chamber door, his body protesting but obeying. Go to Thalia. Watch her work. See the parents' faces when she explains why their enhanced neighbors' children survived the same fever that killed theirs. See what institutional equality looks like when biology refuses to cooperate. Enkidu hesitated, caught between obedience and objection, finally settling on the former. I'll attend. But grandfather, I don't understand how watching tragedy will change the mathematical realities of governance. Enhanced humans are more capable. That's not supremacy, that's a measurable fact. Yes. Incapability without justice is tyranny. That's also a measurable fact. I've watched it happen over 4,800 years of human civilization. But facts don't change minds, Enkidu. Experience does. So go. Experience what your capabilities look like to those who don't share them. Gilgamesh watched his grandson leave, footsteps receding down the corridor with the measured pace of someone not entirely convinced but unwilling to argue. The kind of compromise that meant agreement in form but disagreement in substance, the shape of partnership without its spirit. Thalia's clinic occupied a converted grain storehouse in Uruk's western quarter, its mud brick walls thick enough to muffle the sounds that medicine sometimes required. Enkidu arrived precisely when Gilgamesh had specified, his internal chronometer accurate to within seconds despite having no mechanical timepiece. The waiting area smelled of herbs and illness, of bodies fighting infections they'd never defeat, of baseline human fragility rendered into olfactory form. 3 families waited. 2 enhanced, 1 baseline. Enkidu recognized them all by name. Partnership governance required knowing the governed. Ishtar and Enlil, an enhanced couple, their daughter Ninsun sitting between them, 5 years old, bright-eyed, already showing the optical enhancements that mark enhanced children. She swung her legs, humming, occasionally coughing but recovering quickly, her body's sophisticated immune response visible in the flush returning to her cheeks even as he watched. Beside them, Eresh and Kur, also enhanced, their son Dumuzi, 7 years old, reading clay tablets with the hyperfocus that enhanced cognition enabled in children who learned to direct attention. His fever had broken 2 days ago. He was here for final clearance to confirm the infection had been eliminated and to document recovery for medical records. Against the far wall, Nammu and Enki. Baseline humans. Their daughter's mat was empty. Nammu's hands twisted a piece of cloth that had been their daughter's favorite garment, the fabric worn soft from handling. Enki stared at nothing, his face carrying the particular emptiness that came from loss so recent the mind hadn't fully processed it into grief. They were here because Thalia insisted on examining parents after child loss, checking for the same infections, ensuring tragedy didn't compound. Enkidu. Thalia emerged from the treatment room, her enhanced perception noting his arrival before he'd fully entered. Thank you for coming. Please, observe. She didn't explain what he was observing. Didn't need to. The contrast was its own explanation. Thalia examined Ninsun first. Quick, efficient, the 5-year-old giggled when the cold diagnostic tool touched her enhanced skin, her body temperature already optimal, her respiratory rate perfect, her recovery complete. 3 more days of rest, Thalia instructed Ishtar and Enlil. Keep her hydrated. No strenuous activity. But she's past the critical phase. Her immune system handled the infection before it reached dangerous concentrations. The enhanced parents nodded, relieved but not surprised. Enhanced children got sick sometimes. They recovered. That was how biology worked when it had been designed to work efficiently. Dumuzi's examination took even less time. His infection was utterly gone, eliminated by immune responses that had activated the moment foreign pathogens were detected, mounted coordinated cellular defenses that baseline human bodies couldn't replicate without external intervention. He's cleared for normal activity, Thalia told Eresh and Kur. The fever won't return. His body learned the pathogen signature. He's effectively immune to this particular infection now. Both enhanced families left, children chattering, parents making plans for tomorrow's activities, already moving past illness toward normalcy, as if health had never been interrupted. Nammu and Enki didn't move from their mat against the wall. Thalia approached them slowly, her medical bag in hand, but knowing no tool she carried could address what they'd lost. "May I examine you?" she asked quietly. The same fever that affected the children sometimes lingers in adults. I want to ensure you're both recovering. Nammu finally looked up, her eyes focusing on Thalia with an expression Enkidu couldn't quite read. Not anger. Not exactly. Something more complicated. We're fine, she said, her voice carrying baseline exhaustion that enhanced stamina never quite experienced. Our bodies fought it off. We survived. Your daughter was 4 years old, Thalia said gently, crouching to their level, making herself physically smaller despite the biological superiority she couldn't hide. Lila. She liked watching the craftsmen in the bronze quarter and wanted to learn metalwork even though most artisans said she was too young. I remember her asking me questions about why metals changed when heated. Nammu's hands stopped twisting the cloth. You remember her? I remember every child I couldn't save. Thalia's voice carried weight that medical expertise couldn't lift. Every baseline child whose immune system simply couldn't mount a sufficient response, whose body lacked the cellular mechanisms that enhanced children receive genetically, whose death was inevitable once the fever reached critical concentrations. Enki spoke for the first time since Enkidu had entered. The enhanced children survived. Same fever. Same pathogen. They survived because their bodies are better. Not a question. A statement. An accusation without anger, somehow more devastating than rage would have been. Thalia nodded. Yes. Enhanced immune systems respond faster, more efficiently, with greater precision. They were designed to survive infections that would kill unenhanced humans. That design is why those children recovered. That design is why Lila didn't. That's not fair, Nammu said quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that came when screaming would change nothing. No, Thalia agreed. It's not fair. It's biology. Biology doesn't negotiate with ethics. Enhanced humans have advantages that baseline humans can't match through effort, virtue, or determination. Those advantages save lives. The absence of those advantages ends them. Enkidu stood by the doorway, watching, understanding why Gilgamesh had sent him here. Understanding it with his cognition, even as something deeper resisted the understanding. Nammu looked directly at him. Not at Thalia. At him. Enhanced human. 45 years old, never seriously ill, his body's sophisticated defenses protecting him from pathogens that had killed this woman's daughter. You have children? She asked. No. Not yet. When you do, they'll survive fevers like this. Their bodies will fight infections that killed my daughter. They'll live because of genetic modifications that make them better at living. She wasn't crying. Crying was for grief that still had energy. This was beyond that. And you'll tell me that's not supremacy. You'll tell me that capability doesn't justify hierarchy. You'll tell me partnership means equality despite biological inequality. Enkidu's mouth opened. Closed. The arguments he'd marshaled earlier, the logical framework demonstrating that enhanced governance produced optimal outcomes, the mathematical proof that capability-based decision-making improved efficiency, the carefully reasoned position that acknowledging difference wasn't the same as asserting superiority, all of it dissolved when confronted with a mother holding her dead daughter's favorite cloth. He started. Sorry? Nammu finished. I know. Everyone's sorry. Thalia's sorry she couldn't save Lila. The enhanced families are sorry their children survived, while mine didn't. Gilgamesh is sorry biology isn't fair. Everyone's sorry. She stood slowly, Enki rising with her, both of them moving toward the door. But sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't make a partnership equal when our children die while yours live. Sorry is just words we use when we can't fix what's broken. They left. Enkidu stood aside to let them pass, his enhanced reflexes ensuring he didn't accidentally make contact, his cognitive speed processing their body language and concluding they didn't want comfort from someone whose existence represented what they'd lost. Thalia watched them go, then turned to Enkidu. Your grandfather sent you here to see this. Did you see it? I saw. Not the facts. The facts you already knew. Enhanced immune systems are superior. Baseline, children die from infections. Enhanced, children survive. You've read Nix's probability models. You understand the statistics. Thalia's voice carried a gentleness that her words didn't soften. Did you see what those facts mean? Did you feel what partnership asks of people who know their children will die while their neighbors' children live? Did you understand what equality sounds like to parents burying 4-year-olds because biology wasn't fair? Enkidu's hands clenched at his sides. What do you want me to say? Should enhanced humans apologize for having better immune systems? Should we feel guilty for biological advantages we didn't choose? That partnership requires us to pretend capability differences don't exist? No. Thalia moved toward her medical instruments, beginning the cleaning process that baseline hygiene required and enhanced metabolism rarely needed. I want you to understand why partnership isn't a solution. It's a choice we make every day, even though it's harder, less efficient, and produces outcomes that no one is satisfied with. I want you to understand what Gilgamesh knows that you don't yet feel. Which is that being better at living doesn't make you better at knowing how to live together. Thalia looked at him thoroughly, her enhanced perception reading micro-expressions he couldn't hide. That capability without justice becomes tyranny, not because enhanced humans are evil, but because advantage becomes domination when nothing constrains it. That institutional equality matters precisely because biological equality is impossible. She paused, giving him time to process. Lila died 3 days ago. Same fever, your hypothetical future children would survive without medical intervention. That's not Nammu's failure as a parent. That's not Lila's weakness. That's just biology doing what biology does when some humans have been genetically modified to survive, and others haven't. I can't change biology, Enkidu said quietly. No. But you can choose how you use biological advantage. You can choose whether capability justifies domination or requires restraint. You can choose whether the partnership's inefficiency is a bug or a feature. Thalia resumed cleaning, her movements precise, mechanical, the kind of routine that provided structure when nothing else did. Your grandfather has spent 146 years choosing restraint when domination would have been easier. Choosing justice when efficiency would have been faster. Choosing a partnership when hierarchy would have been simpler. She looked at him one final time. He's dying, Enkidu. Soon, those choices will be yours. And baseline parents will still bury their children, while enhanced parents celebrate recovery. Biology won't become fair just because you want it to be. The question is whether you'll choose partnership despite biology's unfairness or surrender to hierarchy because biology makes it easy. Enkidu left the clinic without responding. Couldn't respond. Every argument he'd prepared earlier seemed inadequate after watching a mother hold fabric that had belonged to her dead daughter. Every logical framework for enhanced governance seemed hollow after seeing the empty mat where a 4-year-old should have been sitting. He walked back toward the royal complex, his enhanced legs covering ground efficiently, his superior cardiovascular system ensuring he didn't tire, his modified biology protecting him from pathogens that filled the air in Uruk's densely packed quarters. Gilgamesh had been right. Facts didn't change minds. Experience did. The tremor in his left hand had spread to his right. Both styluses rattled when he tried to grip them now. He'd been documenting his memories, trying to preserve lessons learned over 172 years of enhanced existence. But the essential lessons, the ones that actually mattered, couldn't be written. They had to be lived. Felt. Understood through failure and consequence rather than transmitted through cuneiform on clay tablets. How do you teach someone that capability doesn't equal worthiness when everything in their experience confirms the opposite? How do you explain justice to someone who's never needed it? How do you make privilege visible to those who've never known its absence? Through the window, Uruk continued its morning routine. Baseline humans moving through streets with the efficiency of long practice, carrying goods to market, maintaining the irrigation canals that kept the city fed, building and repairing, and sustaining the civilization that would outlast them all. Most would die before reaching 60. Their children would face the same abbreviated existence. Generation after generation after generation of abbreviated lives, each one precious and brief and containing full human consciousness despite its temporal limitations. And scattered among them, the enhanced. Living longer, thinking faster, healing quicker, accumulating advantages across centuries that baseline humans could never match. Not through malice or conspiracy but through simple biological reality, Thalia's modification working exactly as designed, creating permanent hierarchies through genetic intervention that could never be undone. The partnership hadn't solved that. Constitutional frameworks and institutional protections couldn't overcome cellular reality. All they'd done was create structures that forced the question to be asked daily. What do you choose? Capability or justice? Efficiency or equity? Biology or ethics? Gilgamesh had chosen justice, equity, and ethics. Every day for 146 years of rule, he'd chosen the more challenging path over the easier one, partnership over dominance, shared power over consolidated control. And now he was dying, and his successor didn't understand why any of it mattered. The despair deepened. Not hopelessness, he'd seen enough to know partnership was possible. But something worse. The knowledge that this would be the permanent pattern. Each generation would have to learn the lesson anew. Each enhanced human born into privilege would need to discover why privilege required constraint. Each baseline human born into disadvantage would need to learn that disadvantage didn't equal worthlessness. No amount of documentation could change that. No constitutional framework could enforce it permanently. Partnership required a conscious choice, made daily, by individuals who would die before seeing whether their choices mattered in the long run. That was the burden he couldn't pass to Enkidu through words. That was the weight his grandson would have to discover through experience, if he discovered it at all. The council chamber occupied the eastern quarter of the royal complex, its design reflecting Zephyrus's architectural philosophy in physical form. Circular seating arrangement, no head of table, no positions of honor, every seat theoretically equal. Expansive skylights admit natural light, minimizing shadows and making subterfuge difficult. Acoustic properties ensure that even quiet speech is clearly audible across all positions, preventing side conversations from fragmenting the discussion. Theory meeting practice. Ideal encountering reality. Gilgamesh arrived early, as he always did when his body permitted. The chamber was empty except for Kronos, who stood studying the seating arrangement with the expression of someone finding flaws in a previously acceptable design. The baseline representatives consistently choose seats near the water pitchers, Kronos said without preamble, his tone carrying analytical observation rather than judgment. Enhanced delegates select positions near the document tables. It creates functional segregation despite architectural intention to prevent it. People sit where they're comfortable. Gilgamesh moved to his customary position, deliberately chosen to be neither near water nor documents, marking neutral territory by refusing both advantages. You built a space that could support equality. You can't force humans to embrace it. Kronos turned, his ageless face carrying the kind of precision that made humans uncomfortable when they looked too long. No lines from age, no scars from injury, no weathering from time. 53,000 years compressed into features that appeared 40 by human standards, maintained by cellular regeneration that had no upper limit and no accumulated cost. Enkidu believes partnership is inefficient. Not a question. Kronos rarely asked questions when statements sufficed. Enkidu believes capability justifies hierarchy. Gilgamesh lowered himself onto the bench that had been specially modified to support his failing body, cushions and back support that no enhanced human in their prime would require. He's not wrong that enhanced governance produces better outcomes by most measurable metrics. He's wrong that outcomes are the only thing that matters. Are they not? The question carried genuine curiosity. Kronos had spent 50,000 years optimizing systems, building frameworks, and creating structures that maximized efficiency and minimized waste. He genuinely didn't understand why justice might matter more than results when survival depended on results. Gilgamesh leaned back, feeling vertebrae that had once supported impossible loads protest at the simple act of sitting. On our home world, before the star went unstable, before you fled here, what was your civilization's structure? Hierarchical. Capability-based advancement. Those with superior cognitive processing managed complex systems. Those with enhanced physical abilities handled technical implementation. Those with... And it destroyed itself. Kronos paused, his expression flickering through emotions too quickly for baseline humans to track but clear enough to enhance perception. Discomfort. Recognition. Resistance to acknowledged truth. Our star's instability was an astronomical phenomenon. Not social consequence. But your civilization couldn't coordinate escape effectively enough to save more than 600 beings out of 17 million. 600. You had the technology for larger scale evacuation, Kronos. We've seen your archives. You had the resources, the ships, the knowledge. What you lacked was the social cohesion required for mass cooperation. Hierarchies optimize for efficiency until they fragment under pressure. Then everyone dies, efficiently. Kronos moved to the document table, fingers tracing architectural drawings with the precision of someone for whom mathematics was emotional comfort. Partnership is demonstrably less efficient. Enhanced cognitive speed means we can analyze problems faster, implement solutions more quickly, and coordinate responses with less communication delay. And baseline humans have something you don't. They die. Gilgamesh watched Kronos's fingers still on the drawings. They know in their bones, in their experience, in every decision they make, that time is limited. Those choices have consequences they'll face in their abbreviated existence. Enhanced humans think in centuries. Baseline humans think in seasons. Different time horizons create different wisdom. That's romanticism. That's reality. Isa has forgotten more about agricultural cycles than you've ever learned because he's lived them. Shearer understands political coalition building better than Enkidu because he's had to maintain alliances knowing he'll die before seeing a payoff. Baseline humans develop skills we don't need because we have time to iterate. They don't. So they get it right faster in ways that matter. Kronos' fingers stopped moving across the architectural drawings. For someone who lived through mathematics, who found emotional comfort in geometric precision, stillness was an admission of internal conflict. On the homeworld, he said quietly, I managed infrastructure allocation for 18 million beings across 4 continents, optimized resource distribution with efficiency that kept civilization functioning even as our star became unstable. Hierarchical systems worked. Those with cognitive capabilities appropriate for complex calculation made decisions. Those with different capabilities implemented them. Everyone survived proportionate to their role's importance. Until everyone died, Gilgamesh said gently. Until the star's instability reached catastrophic threshold, Kronos corrected, but the correction carried less certainty than his usual precision. The evacuation's failure, 600 saved from 17 million, that was a resource limitation. Insufficient vessels. Inadequate time. Mathematical constraints we couldn't overcome. You had 4 decades of warning, Gilgamesh replied. Nix told me once, 4 decades between detecting instability and stellar collapse. You built 600 evacuation vessels when you had the resources and knowledge to build 6,000. What prevented that? Kronos' jaw tightened. Competing priorities. Political gridlock. Resources were diverted to attempts to stabilize the star rather than accepting the necessity of evacuation. By the time consensus emerged that evacuation was inevitable, time had run out. Political gridlock, Gilgamesh repeated. In your optimized hierarchical system, where cognitive capability determines decision authority, the most intelligent beings in your civilization spent 4 decades arguing instead of acting. Why? Because intelligence doesn't prevent disagreement. Cognitive processing speed doesn't guarantee correct conclusions. Enhanced calculation capabilities don't eliminate competing priorities or reconcile different values or create cooperation when hierarchy fragments under existential pressure. Kronos' voice carried something Gilgamesh had never quite heard from him before, not doubt exactly, but recognition that doubt might be warranted. Your civilization died efficiently, Gilgamesh said. Every decision is optimized for maximum outcome. Every choice is processed through superior cognitive capabilities. Every system is designed to allocate resources efficiently. And when crisis came, efficiency proved inadequate because optimization isn't the same as wisdom. Because capability doesn't guarantee cooperation. Because hierarchy optimizes until it collapses. Kronos looked up from the drawings, his ageless face showing traces of something like pain. You're suggesting our homeworld's destruction was social rather than astronomical. I'm suggesting your homeworld's social structure prevented astronomical solutions. That hierarchy optimized for efficiency until that optimization prevented the cooperation required for survival. That capability-based authority works until crisis reveals that capability doesn't equal wisdom about how to deploy capability collectively. The morning light shifted, illuminating dust motes that drifted through the council chamber's carefully designed air circulation. Kronos watched them move, his enhanced perception tracking trajectories with mathematical precision that missed nothing except perhaps the point. Partnership is demonstrably less efficient, he said finally. Yes. Inefficiency killed 17 million beings on your homeworld while 600 of you survived by abandoning them. Perhaps inefficiency that keeps everyone alive is superior to efficiency that optimizes until everyone dies. Kronos finally turned from the table, his expression carrying something Gilgamesh rarely saw, uncertainty. You're arguing that limitation creates advantage. I'm arguing that different capabilities matter differently. Enhanced processing speed is useful for certain problems. Baseline urgency and intuition matter for others. Partnership isn't about pretending we're equal. It's about recognizing that different doesn't mean inferior. The chamber began filling. Enhanced delegate arrivals, precise on time, internal chronometer accuracy, making tardiness almost impossible. Baseline representatives arriving with the slight variations that natural time sense created early or late by minutes, measuring time by sun position and experience rather than cognitive precision. And in those minor differences, Gilgamesh saw the entire challenge laid out. How do you build a partnership between beings whose basic experience of reality differs fundamentally? How do you create equality when biology refuses to cooperate? How do you convince the privileged that constraints on their advantage aren't oppression but justice? Thalia entered with a group of baseline humans, her presence among them deliberate and symbolic. She caught Gilgamesh's eye, gave the slight head tilt that meant we need to talk privately, then moved to her seat with the kind of grace that only 6,000 years of practice in a body that never deteriorated could produce. In the gallery's upper tier, barely visible in the shadows where observation required enhanced visual acuity to detect presence, Methuselah watched. Not as a council member, the Enochian order maintained separation from official governance to preserve operational secrecy. Not as Gilgamesh's ally, though he'd known the founder for decades and respected what the enhanced human had built. As observer. As recorder. As keeper of truths that most immortals didn't know existed and most humans wouldn't comprehend if revealed. Methuselah was 147 years old, an enhanced human whose father, Enoch, had founded the order before dying 15 years earlier. Inherited burden without choosing it. Accepted responsibility without certainty of purpose. Led an organization dedicated to preparing both species for the revelation that approached inexorably despite everyone's efforts to manage its timing. The order documented everything. Especially moments like this. Gilgamesh dying. Enkidu questioning. The Partnership Council is functioning despite the founder's decline. Enhanced humans are frustrated by constraints. Baseline humans trusting inadequate institutions. The six-domain crisis was converging exactly as Nix's probability calculations predicted and exactly as his father had warned when establishing the covenant a century earlier. He encoded observations through subtle hand movements that the quantum bracelet translated into secure communications, technology most humans wouldn't recognize as anything beyond decorative metalwork. Notes flowing to order safe houses in Memphis, Harappa, Anatolia, and the northern settlements. 12 members coordinating across 3 continents, documenting the partnership's testing for archives that would survive millennia. When revelation came, not if, but when humans would need complete context, because his father had calculated a timeline showing that disclosure was inevitable within 3 to 5 centuries. Would need to understand how enhanced consolidation emerged not through conspiracy but through biology's inexorable logic. Would need to see that capable beings reach dangerous conclusions through impeccable reasoning. Would need evidence that the partnership was tried, tested, strained, but not abandoned, despite the easier alternative of hierarchy. The order preserved that evidence. That context. That honesty. Gilgamesh caught his eye briefly, founder recognizing observer, acknowledging documentation without revealing order's existence to others present. Small nod. Slight acknowledgement. Understanding between beings who'd built inadequate institutions and passed burdens without guarantees. Methuselah returned the gesture. Father had taught him, founders die, institutions persist or collapse, but documentation ensures future generations understand what was attempted, what was lost, what mattered. The council session continued. Enhanced delegates argue efficiency. Baseline representatives defending equity. Hybrid mediators are exhausting themselves in an attempt to bridge unbridgeable gaps. Partnership is functioning adequately despite functioning inadequately. Institutions that hold despite recognizing their own insufficiency. All of it documented. All of it preserved. All of it was waiting for revelation to make the historical record meaningful to species that didn't yet know they'd been watched, guided, and documented through every crisis, every choice, every moment when biology pressed toward consolidation and ethics insisted on maintaining equity. The order remembered everything, especially the failures. Because honest documentation of failure was more valuable than comfortable lies about success. Methuselah would return to the order's safe house beneath the Uruk temple after the session ended, encode the complete record of today's council into quantum storage, distribute the analysis to other members, and continue work his father had begun, preparing humanity for the truth that would shatter comfortable deceptions about their own development. Partnership was being tested. The order documented the testing. Revelation would judge whether testing produced wisdom or merely postponed inevitable consolidation. But judgment required a complete record. That was the covenant's purpose. That was why Methuselah washed from the shadows while the partnership's founder died slowly, the successor questioned loudly, and institutions strained visibly. Someone needed to remember it all. Someone needed to preserve truth for a future that couldn't yet comprehend its necessity. The Enochian order served. The order observed. The order is prepared. And in the gallery's shadows, documentation continued. The session began with Gilgamesh's standard opening, a brief acknowledgement of partnership's fragility, a reminder that every decision required both enhanced efficiency and baseline wisdom, a call for patience with a process that served all populations rather than optimizing for any single group. Then the agricultural protocols Enkidu had mentioned. Issa of Yor stood first. 73 years old, baseline human who'd served on agricultural councils since before Enkidu was born. His body showed age that enhanced humans didn't experience, joints stiff, skin weathered, hair white, movements careful. But his mind remained sharp, his knowledge vast, his voice steady. Water allocation for the growing season, Issa began, spreading clay tablets before him with calculations that had taken his delegation 3 days to complete. We've analyzed rainfall patterns for the past 12 years, river flow measurements from 14 monitoring points, soil moisture data from regional reports, historical crop yields under varying conditions, and labor availability across 7 districts. He spoke for 30 minutes. Detailed, thorough, accounting for variables that pure mathematical optimization might miss, farmers' traditional knowledge about microclimates, seasonal variations in work capacity, social structures that affected labor distribution, political considerations in resource allocation, and cultural practices that influence crop selection. Enhanced delegates listened with the patience of those who processed information faster than it could be delivered. Baseline representatives followed every word, occasionally nodding at points they recognized from their own communities. When Issa finished, he remained standing, clay tablets spread before him like evidence in a trial. Then Ishara rose. Enhanced human, 47 years old, a mathematician whose cognitive processing allowed her to complete in minutes what had taken Issa's delegation 3 days. Beautiful in the way enhanced humans often were, optimal bone structure, perfect symmetry, features refined through genetic modification until attractiveness became almost standard. She spoke for 3 minutes. I've reviewed the data Issa presented. His conclusions are correct. However, the optimal allocation can be calculated more precisely. Here are the refined numbers, accounting for the same variables plus irrigation efficiency factors and projected climate variations based on astronomical cycles. She presented allocations that differed from Issa's by margins of 2 to 4% per district. Mathematically superior. Demonstrably more efficient. Issa listened without visible reaction, though Gilgamesh knew what he was thinking. 3 minutes to review what took us 3 days. This is what we're competing against. The debate that followed lasted 90 minutes. Nimlul, enhanced engineer, argued for Ishara's optimization. Why implement a solution we know is suboptimal when we have the capacity to calculate better allocations? We're serving the population by providing maximum efficiency. Mira, a baseline farmer who'd worked Mesopotamian soil for 50 years, countered, your calculations don't account for what farmers know about their specific fields. Soil conditions vary more than your models capture. Our proposal incorporates knowledge that doesn't reduce to numbers. Back and forth. Enhanced delegates pointed to efficiency gains. Baseline representatives emphasizing local knowledge and practical experience. Hybrid council members are attempting to synthesize mathematical optimization with ground truth wisdom. Issa spoke again, his voice carrying weight that transcended processing speed. I'm 73 years old. In baseline terms, I'm ancient. I've outlived most of my generation by 2 decades. I've forgotten more about Mesopotamian agriculture than many here have learned. When my delegation takes 3 days to analyze what enhanced minds complete in 3 minutes, we're not being slow. We're being thorough. My grandfather taught me farming. His grandfather taught him. 4 generations of accumulated wisdom about this specific land, these specific conditions, these specific people. That knowledge doesn't process faster with enhanced cognition. It takes time to consult with farmers across 7 districts. It takes time to consider factors that aren't captured by rainfall measurements. You can calculate optimal allocations faster than we can. But can you calculate what I know about how yours farmers will actually implement those allocations? Can you model the social dynamics that determine whether policies succeed or fail? Can you account for the human factors that make your optimal solution impossible in practice? He paused, letting the question settle. Partnership isn't about speed. It's about wisdom. And wisdom requires processing information you can't measure. The chamber fell quiet. Enhanced delegates were uncomfortable because Issa's argument was logically sound, even if practically frustrating. Baseline representatives were grateful someone had articulated their position eloquently. Gilgamesh watched Enkidu. His grandson's face showed polite attention, professional respect. And underneath, barely visible even to enhanced perception, absolute certainty that Issa was wrong, that efficiency mattered more than tradition, that capability should determine authority. Compliance without conviction. After 2 hours, the vote was called. Each district representative voted on water allocation protocols. A 2/3 majority was required for passage. Issa's proposal, 58 votes in favor, 32 opposed. Ishara's refined version, 51 votes in favor, 39 opposed. Neither reached the 2/3 threshold compromise required. Another hour of negotiation produced a hybrid approach: Issa's baseline allocations for 7 districts, Ishara's optimized calculations for 3 districts where efficiency gains were largest and social considerations minimal. Final vote, 73 in favor, 17 opposed. Partnership functioning. Not optimally, but acceptably. Not efficient, but legitimate. The session concluded. Enhanced delegates departed precisely on time. Meetings ended when scheduled, plans executed as planned. Baseline representatives lingered, discussing implications, building relationships, and processing decisions through a social context that transcended pure information transfer. Enkidu approached Gilgamesh, expression carefully neutral. 2 hours for water allocation. We could have calculated optimal solutions in 10 minutes. 10 minutes would have given you calculations. 2 hours gave you legitimacy. Is legitimacy worth the time cost when people need water? People need water and trust. You can mandate distribution without a partnership. You can optimize allocation without consensus. But you can't sustain civilization without both. Enkidu's expression suggested he understood the words but not the weight behind them. Young enhanced delegates were clustering near the chamber exit: Ninlil, Lugal, Ishara, building consensus, developing arguments, preparing for the next challenge to the partnership's inefficiency. A generation that inherited stability without understanding the chaos that preceded it. A generation that saw constraints without recognizing the tyranny those constraints prevented. A generation that needed to learn the lessons Gilgamesh had learned but would resist until catastrophe forced education through experience rather than instruction. He felt the tremor in his hands returning. Not pain. Just failure. Cellular breakdown that whispered the message again: you're temporary. Everything you built is fragile. And the next generation doesn't understand why it matters. She looked 30. Had looked 30 for 6 millennia. It would look 36 millennia hence. While everyone around her aged and died and turned to dust, and were replaced by children who aged and died and turned to dust in their own time. How could beings who didn't die understand beings who did? How could beings who did die trust beings who couldn't? These weren't philosophical questions. They were the practical challenges of every partnership council session, every policy debate, every decision that required cooperation across the unbridgeable gap of biological difference. Enkidu entered last, his timing deliberate, not late enough to be discourteous but late enough to be noticed. He moved to his seat with controlled precision, and Gilgamesh recognized the expression. I've done what you asked. I've seen what you wanted me to see. I'm not convinced. That would have to be enough for now. Conviction couldn't be forced, it could only be invited. The council session began with the agricultural protocols Enkidu had mentioned: water allocation for the growing season, distribution of seed grain from royal stores, and labor requirements for canal maintenance. Technical problems with straightforward solutions, except that straightforward solutions created winners and losers, and a partnership required that losses be shared rather than concentrated among the weakest. Issa presented the baseline analysis. Slow, thorough, accounting for factors that enhanced processing might miss, seasonal variations, historical patterns, social considerations. 30 minutes of presentation that could have been completed in 3 if enhanced delegates had done the work. Gilgamesh watched Enkidu's face. Patient. Respectful. And utterly certain this was wasteful inefficiency. Then Ishara, a brilliant, enhanced mathematician, 47 years old, presented the accelerated analysis. 3 minutes of dense calculation, optimal distribution based on mathematical models, maximizing total output across all variables. Different answers. Both valid. And the choice between them would determine whether partnership meant anything or was just performance. The debate lasted 2 hours. Enhanced delegates are arguing for optimization. Baseline representatives arguing for equity. Hybrid mediators sought a middle ground that satisfied no one but avoided open conflict. Eventually, they voted. The baseline proposal passed by 3 votes, a constitutional requirement that agricultural policy needed 2/3 approval meant enhanced delegation couldn't force its preference through a simple numerical majority. Efficient? No. Just? Perhaps. Sustainable? That remained to be seen. Gilgamesh watched Enkidu's face throughout. Saw the moment understanding arrived, not that justice mattered, but that partnership meant accepting outcomes you believed were wrong because process mattered more than results. And saw the moment Enkidu rejected that understanding. The subtle shift in expression that meant, I'll comply, but I disagree. I'll follow the process, but I believe it's foolish. Compliance without conviction. Form without spirit. After the session ended, Kronos approached Gilgamesh as the chamber emptied. Your grandson is talented. Yes. He doesn't understand why partnership matters. No. Will he learn? Gilgamesh felt the tremor spreading through his hands again, cellular failure progressing despite enhanced healing, trying desperately to compensate, 30 years remaining. Maybe. If his body cooperated and entropy showed mercy, it rarely did. I don't know. That's the nature of generational forgetting, each generation has to learn the lesson fresh. I learned by watching hidden guidance fail. Enkidu lives in a world where partnership already exists, so he doesn't understand what came before or why it was necessary. Kronos studied him with the intensity of someone whose analytical mind was struggling with variables that refused to reduce to equations. If he doesn't learn, what happens to the partnership? Then the next generation tries. Or the one after that. Partnership isn't something you achieve permanently, Kronos. It's something you choose daily, and some generations choose badly, and the consequences teach the next generation to choose better. That's the cost of conscious choice over biological determinism. That's. Kronos paused, searching for words. Exhausting. Yes. Inefficient. Yes. And you believe it's worth it? Gilgamesh looked at the empty chamber, at the architectural marvel Zephyrus had designed to embody equality, at the spaces where baseline and enhanced humans had just spent 2 hours arguing about water rights with the seriousness that proved they all believed their voices mattered. I believe it's necessary. Whether it's worth it, ask me in 3,000 years. If the partnership survives the 5 trigger points Nix identified, if baseline and enhanced humans coexist without one dominating the other, if conscious choice can overcome biological determinism, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe. Kronos left without further comment, his expression suggesting he was filing away data that didn't fit his models. Gilgamesh remained in the chamber after the others had departed, feeling the weight of 172 years pressing against bones that remembered being stronger. The walls held, because he built them to hold. The city thrived because the partnership he'd helped establish created the frameworks that enabled it to do so. The council functioned because institutions larger than individuals maintained governance even when individuals failed. But frameworks were hollow without people willing to inhabit them. Institutions were temporary without individuals choosing to maintain them. Partnership required commitment from each generation to renew, and there was no guarantee that any generation would make the right choice. He thought of Enkidu's father, Kyan, his son, who died 42 years ago at age 131. Same lessons taught. Same resistance encountered, same pattern repeating across generations. Kyan had been brilliant. Enhanced cognition producing insights that matched Gilgamesh's own. Mathematical ability that rivaled any immortal. engineering knowledge that transformed theoretical concepts into physical structures. Ensure that enhanced advantages justified enhanced authority. Gilgamesh had tried to teach him the necessity of partnership and had shown him the collapse of hierarchies on the immortal homeworld. Had explained that capability doesn't equal worthiness, that optimization without justice becomes tyranny, that efficiency gains today often produce catastrophe tomorrow. Kyan had listened politely, complied outwardly, and maintained a facade of partnership support. Then he designed the Northern District expansion using enhanced-only calculations, implementing optimal layouts that baseline administrators couldn't maintain. Beautiful mathematics. Perfect engineering. Complete failure when baseline workers couldn't execute the enhanced optimized protocols. The collapse had killed 17 people, including Kyan, who'd been supervising the installation when his own optimization failed. Killed by his own refusal to accept that different capabilities required different design approaches. Killed by the arrogance of believing enhanced advantages overcame practical constraints. Killed by a pattern he wouldn't recognize as dangerous until catastrophe-proved recognition came too late. And now Enkidu walked the same path. Different specifics, same underlying pattern. Enhanced grandson questioning partnership, seeing constraints without understanding their necessity, measuring efficiency without calculating sustainability. The pattern would repeat. Again and again. Each generation forgets what previous generations learned through pain. Each generation needed to rediscover that conscious choice mattered more than biological advantage, that justice transcended optimization, that partnership required choosing the more challenging path because the alternative, no matter how efficient, led to tyranny. Gilgamesh had documented everything, thousands of clay tablets record decisions, lessons learned, and established principles. Future generations would have access to complete institutional memory. But documentation wasn't wisdom. Reading about Kyan's death wouldn't teach Enkidu what experiencing a catastrophe would. Seeing partnership strain wouldn't convey what partnership's collapse would demonstrate. Knowing the history intellectually wouldn't produce the conviction that only personal experience could generate. He could pass institutions to his successor. Could transfer governance structures. Could document principles in clay that would survive millennia. But he couldn't pass conviction. Couldn't transfer commitment. Couldn't document the weight of responsibility in ways that made it felt rather than merely known. Each generation would face the 5 trigger points Nyx had identified. First, enhanced consolidation as young enhanced questions sharing power with baseline populations. Happening now, Gilgamesh's death is accelerating the crisis. Second, resource scarcity when there wasn't enough for everyone. Bronze Age heading toward tin shortage in the coming centuries. Third, technology cascade when human innovation exceeded immortal guidance. Metallurgy spreading, writing democratizing knowledge, mathematics advancing. Fourth, speciation occurs when enhanced and baseline humans become biologically incompatible. Thalia's research showing it was inevitable within millennia. Fifth, environmental catastrophe when accelerated development stressed planetary capacity. Deforestation, soil depletion, and climate change are accelerating. 5 tests. 5 opportunities for partnership to collapse. Each trigger point requires its own generation to consciously choose whether to maintain the partnership or surrender to biological determinism. Nyx had calculated a 77% survival probability if all 5 trigger points were navigated successfully. Not certainty. Just better odds than alternatives. But probability calculations didn't capture what those odds meant in practice. 5 generations would have to choose correctly. 5 sets of leaders would need to learn lessons their predecessors documented but couldn't fully convey. 5 critical moments when choosing wrong would produce a catastrophe that choosing right could prevent. And Gilgamesh wouldn't be there to guide them. Wouldn't survive to see whether his life's work succeeded or failed. Wouldn't know if the partnership proved sustainable or merely delayed the inevitable hierarchy. He'd done what he could, built what needed building, established what was required, and documented what could be written and taught what could be taught. Now he was dying, and his successor didn't understand why any of it mattered. The only thing Gilgamesh knew with certainty was that this pattern would repeat until either partnership succeeded across generations or failed catastrophically when one generation chose wrong. The tremor in his hand steadied slightly, not because his body was healing but because he'd accepted what was coming. 30 years if he was lucky. Probably less. Time to hope. Because hope was all the founders could pass to their successors, and hope was all that separated conscious choice from unconscious pattern repetition. The walls would hold for now. Whether they'd hold for the next generation, the generation after that, the 5 generations facing 5 trigger points, that remained uncertain. All he could do was hope they'd choose wisely when their moment came. All he could offer was institutions that made a wise choice possible. All he could leave was documentation showing why a wise choice mattered. The rest was theirs to determine. Partnership or hierarchy. Justice or efficiency. Conscious choice or biological determinism. The testing had begun. The order would document it. Revelation would judge it. Somewhere beneath this temple, in chambers protected by quantum-stabilized passages, order members were encoding this day's events. Gilgamesh's tremor. Enkidu's resistance. The council session where the partnership operated, but no one felt satisfied. Isa's delegation spent 14 days on calculations and enhanced cognition, and completed in hours. The farmers noticed details that were optimized. All of it preserved. All of it contextualized. All of it prepared for the moment thousands of years hence when humans would discover they've been guided, and would need to understand whether that guidance justified the deception, whether intervention prevented catastrophes or merely delayed inevitable failures, whether conscious choice could overcome biological determinism or merely postponed hierarchy's triumph. The order would ensure that revelation had the complete truth. Not a comfortable truth. Not vindication or exoneration. Just truth. The partnership struggled. The founders died uncertain. Enhanced humans questioned whether capability justified authority. Baseline humans maintained skepticism about refugees who'd lied for 48,000 years. Biology refused to cooperate with ethics. Justice required choosing inefficiency when efficiency seemed obviously superior. All true simultaneously. All is documented thoroughly. All preserved for judgment that would occur long after everyone involved had died. Methuselah would encode today's failure. Gilgamesh, unable to make his grandson understand through words what experience might eventually teach. The order would note it. Revelation would have access to it. Future generations would judge whether the founders' failure mattered or whether institutions succeeded despite their creators' inadequacy. That was the covenant's promise. Complete documentation. Unflinching honesty. Truth preserved across millennia for revelation that would judge whether preservation justified the order's existence, whether secrecy served transparency, whether documentation was action sufficient to balance intervention's harm. And somewhere in the far future, humans would look back at this moment and know whether the founders' hope had been justified or merely naive optimism that reality dismantled, generation by generation, until nothing remained but the tyranny the partnership was designed to prevent. Gilgamesh left the chamber, hands trembling, body failing, hope fragile. The walls held. Everything else awaited its generation's choice. Gilgamesh's hands are shaking. Enkidu watched Nammu hold her daughter's cloth and still doesn't understand why partnership matters more than efficiency. The founder has perhaps 30 years remaining. His successor believes capability justifies authority. The walls of Uruk hold. The institutions are functioning. But institutional frameworks can't enforce themselves when the person who built them dies. In Chapter 2, The Entitled Generation, we'll see what happens when enhanced humans gather in private to ask the question Enkidu is learning to voice: why should we share power with populations who process information more slowly, decide less efficiently, and contribute less capability? Ishara runs the probability models. Nyx incorporates data from 17 regions. The numbers are precise. There is an 81% chance that enhanced consolidation succeeds within 2 generations. Kronos and Nyx's 53,000-year relationship fractures over a single question: does optimization justify hierarchy? Join me for Chapter 2, available now. The link is in the description below. If you're enjoying this series, please subscribe. New chapters are released every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And leave a comment: when your children survive diseases that kill your neighbor's children because of genetic advantages, does that justify different voting power? Thank you for listening. I'll see you in Chapter 2.